candidates on this. I would like to introduce the incumbent senator, John Teston. Montana's representative to Congress and challenger for the Senate seat for the Republican Party, Denny Rehberg. And Mr. Dan Cox, Senate candidate for the Libertarian Party. Dan? Mr. Bill, thank you. Senator Tester? Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And I want to thank you, Jim, and the folks that are on the panel. We're just going to go down the line? Okay. I want to thank you, Jim, and the folks on the panel, and Dan Cox and Congressman Rehberg for being here. I want to thank all you folks for being here. This is going to be a debate where, as with all debates, I think we're going to see some agreement, and we're going to see some disagreement. I think it's fair to say that for example, with Real ID and Patriot Act, Dan Cox and I agree. There will be some other issues out here that we will disagree on. As many, if not all of you know, I'm a farmer, third-generation farmer. I have the honor and privilege of farming the land that my grandparents homesteaded. My wife and I have raised 2 kids, and we took another kid in with the proud grandparents of 5, and been proud Montanans our entire life. My record has been one of responsible spending cuts, of making sure that the tax code works for middle-class families and small businesses, and responsible tax cuts. It's for stronger and for a small business climate that makes our economy stronger. It's making sure that women have the right to choose their own medical decisions. Thank you. We'll keep it down. Thank you very much. Making sure that they get equal pay for equal work. Women. Making sure that our freedoms are upheld, like the Second Amendment and freedom of speech. Making sure that we do right by our veterans. Making sure that the folks who have served this country so very, very well. Making sure that this country lives up to the promises that we've made to them when they come back home. There are many, many differences in accountability and transparency that I hope we get into in this debate. There's a great contrast between what I support when it comes to our elderly, when it comes to our children, when it comes to our most vulnerable, and there's a true contrast in that. So I want to thank the Montana Newspaper Association. I look forward to answering the questions and engaging in the debate. I thank once again Dan Cox, Congressman Rehberg for being here, but most importantly, I want to thank all of you for being here. Thank you, Jim.
I want to thank the Montana Newspaper Association as well, and I want to recognize my wife Jan of 34 years in July, and my daughter Katie, who teaches just down the road at West Yellowstone. No grandkids yet, Katie, but we're ready as parents. People ask me what got me involved in politics in the first place, in public service. Why did I want to serve the people of Montana? Well, Jan and I began dating in 1973. In 1974, my great-grandmother passed away and left out the ranch to my mom, my dad, my sister, and I in an undivided interest. As a result of the estate tax, we had to sell a third of our ranch, our homes, the corrals, the barns, our centralized water system, and we started over. Jen and I were married in 1978. And from that time, we were a struggling young couple, trying to build a family, while at the same time trying to rebuild a business. No family ought to have to go through that. It took us 10 years before we could even get a house up on the ranch. I would drive from town out every day to the ranch and back. I didn't even have a shed for a hammer. I started from scratch. And it took Jan and I 10 years to put a house up there, a house that was given to us that was built in the early 1900s. We stuck it on a slab, we drilled a well, and we began building around that house, rebuilding our business. And along the way, we felt firsthand the hand of a federal government, state government, and local government that sometimes didn't understand that a fee was a tax, that a tax was a tax, that a regulation was a tax. And all of the cost added up wasn't one fee, tax, or regulation. It was the cumulative effect of all of that came down on us, stifling effect of state and local governments. I realized I needed to be a part of change, so I got off the couch and I ran for the state legislature. And it was the same motivation that allowed me the opportunity to run for the United States Congress as well. The last 4 years of the Obama administration, the policies have hurt Montana small businesses and families. I'm known for town hall meetings. I have them in all 56 counties continually. And recently, in the last few years, I started asking the question, are you better off than your parents or your grandparents? And almost every hand in the place went up. And I asked the second question, do you think your children are going to be better off than you? And not a hand in the place ever goes up. Nobody feels good about the direction the country is taking. Nobody feels good about the same opportunities that they're going to have to try and rebuild a business or build a business. And that concerns me. And I think about my parents. My dad's 83, my mom's 78. And every year of their golden years that we don't turn this economy around is one more day lost, and that's cruel. We've got to get ourselves out of this recession. We've got to fix the problems that are facing America today. The last 40 years have given us more intrusive government. It is a ballooning deficit, a health care mandate that a lot of people in America don't want to be required to buy. Spending out of control. I remember a debate 6 years ago with then candidate Tester was talking about how out of control the debt was, and every man, woman, and child was going to have to pay $28,000. 6 short years later, every man, woman, and child in America is going to have to pay $50,000. That's not the America we want. And each step of the way, we have a senator who has been a willing partner, a rubber stamp with the President of the United States, a rubber stamp on the health care, the deciding vote. If one of our 2 senators had voted no, we wouldn't be in the mess we're in right now. Montana needs a voice of reason, a voice that clearly understands from the experience of small business, of building a family, of trying to dig out from an estate tax that took part of a small business away, how to rebuild Montana, how to put people back to work, and how to give an opportunity for the next generation while taking care of the current and the older generation of Montana. If elected in November, I will be that voice in the United States Senate. Thank you.
Mr. Cox?
Wow, I just can't believe there's so many people who are willing to take a Saturday out of their life and come and be involved in their government. I think that's amazing. Really, I'm just a regular person who did just get off the couch. I have been politically active to some degree, haven't held any offices. Thanks to the Newspaper Association, I have this opportunity to give you my perspective and the Rehberg and Tester campaign for, allowing all of us to show up for this educational experience. But the reason we're really here is because of our founding fathers. And so what I'm going to start with is a quote from George Washington. He said, "Government is not eloquence. Government is not reason. Government is force. And like fire, it's a troublesome servant and a fearful master." And that's the problem we have. We need a government that can fit inside of our Constitution. Right now, it's a wildfire streaming across America. Now, I haven't been a part of that, but I have been on the sidelines watching it, and I'm tired of it. Right now, we have a national debt that's bigger than our GDP. Yes, we have all kinds of undeclared wars. We have troops in like 135 countries in 900 bases. We're spending money at such a rate that I don't know how we're not already bankrupt. Well, I kind of just found out. We just did a partial audit on the Federal Reserve Bank, and we found out they printed $16.1 trillion and gave it away to their banker buddies at almost a 0% interest rate. So when they do that, that inflates your currency. what they're doing is they're going into your bank account and they're just making all of your dollars worth less. It's like thievery without breaking into your house to steal it. Now the problem is, what I see up in Washington is I see Mitt Romney, his main campaign contributors from everything I've seen are bankers. I haven't seen, the current Senate do anything about secretly printing $16.1 trillion. I guess I see a bunch of firefighters in the room. Well, I'd encourage you to support me, because what we have right now is we have an entire Congress full of arsonists who are spreading that fire that George Washington warned us about. And if you really want to change, vote for the firefighters. I'm going to dump a lot of water on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Okay, we're about to launch into the question portion. Again, I encourage everyone, we have plenty of time. We have all campaign season for applause, catcalls, what have you. Let's hold it till then, okay? At the candidates on request. Thank you.
Senator Tester, the Rehberg campaign has made a central theme that you voted with President Obama 95% of the time on key votes. How do you respond?
Well, I think you can cherry pick votes where I've supported the administration, and that is in fact what's happened. There's plenty of things where we disagree, and I could go down the list, from the auto bailout to the Greece bailout to wolves to farm dust to youth labor on farms. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. I think ultimately what you need to look at is who represents Montana and Washington, D.C. Look, if there's a good policy that comes down the pipe that helps Montana, I support it. If it's making sure that our young people have access to education, I support it, because I think education is one of the keys to democracy, and it's the key to building our economy in the future. If our elderly folks need a safety net like Social Security and Social Security, for example, and Medicare, it's critically important that we make those programs stronger for the future, and it's important we address it. So we vary plenty as we go forward. Like I said, you can cherry pick some of the votes, but the bottom line is that I have cut $2 trillion in spending. I have cut $1.4 trillion in taxes. I think those things, along with many of the other policy decisions that we've done, from wolves to farm dust to trade agreements to making sure we don't have bailouts, critically important. And just look at my record as a whole. We represent Montana values in Washington, D.C.
The 95% is not my statistic, it's Congressional Quarterly, who has been keeping track since 1953. On the major issues, he did not separate from his own party. I think it's more important to support the interests of Montana than the interests of your party, whether it's Republican or Democrat. It has to be the state of Montana. And how did we put people to work? Well, we don't do it by supporting the president's failed economic policies, spending, adding debt, a failed stimulus where 12 cents on the dollar was something that could be perceived as being stimulative, the other went to pure expenses. It didn't build an economy. You look at the cap and trade policy. What did it do? It's nothing more than an energy tax. And what would it have done to the state of Montana? Well, first of all, it was based on an unproven science. But it's an energy tax that would have hurt Montana's economy. How do you put people to work, especially when our economy in the eastern part of the state is so heavily dependent on our traditional fossil fuels, oil, gas, and coal? How do you put a senior at risk when you have an energy tax like cap and trade that does nothing more than raise the price of our energy costs, whether it's electricity, our home heating oil? So ultimately, the decision has to be made on what does our economy look like, who supported the policies that got us to this position, where are the Montana jobs, and when are we finally going to do the right thing and turn the economy around? It wouldn't be supporting President Obama's administration policies.
Mr. Cox?
Well, I guess what we really need to talk about is, should we be supporting Obama's policies? Should we be supporting Bush's policies? You know what we're supposed to be doing? We're supposed to take an oath to to uphold the Constitution of the United States. Doesn't matter what party you're with, it's all about, is this bill constitutional? It's really simple. You get to the part where it's not constitutional, you say, I don't even need to read anymore. Because I've taken an oath of office to not break it. Now, Mark Twain, he had something to say about the issue. He said, whenever the legislature is in session, no man's life, liberty, or property is safe. Well, Mr. Tester just said we were a democracy. I read our Constitution. It says we'll be guaranteed a Republican form of government. The difference between democracy and a republic is in a republic, I have constitutional rights. If every single person in here votes against my rights, the Constitution is supposed to step in and stop you guys from plundering me. We are not a democracy. It's not in any of our state constitutions. It's not in the Declaration of Independence or any of our founding documents. And what we need to do, if we're going to be in these positions, is we need to understand the Constitution, take our oaths serious, and regardless if it's Romney, Obama, I don't care who the president is, you are only safe with rights. Anytime they vote against your rights, you are less safe.
Okay, very good. Next question will be directed to Congressman.
Congressman Rehberg, I'm a student at the University of Montana. I would like to know what's a feasible long-term solution to ensure that interest rates on student loans don't rise after students leave school, especially when rates are set to double in 2 weeks.
I'm absolutely in favor of keeping the rates as low as we possibly can, and the House of Representatives has already passed a package that is sitting over in the Senate. The Constitution is something that we need to be concerned with. The fact that our graduating seniors are getting out and 1 out of 2 are having a difficult time finding a job is another part of that. Unless we turn the economy around, our students won't have the jobs to go to. But in the meantime, let me just use Pell Grants as an example. When we raise the level of a Pell Grant, which we try and do to help the student, the tuition goes up in an equivalent manner. That's not right. That's not the way this should work. If we're trying to help our students, let's see that they can get an education as cheaply as possible so they're not coming out and not only inheriting the $50,000 per man, woman, and child debt I'm talking about, but the debt from the education as well. So I'm in favor of keeping the interest rate as low as possible. We have a package that's over in the Senate. We hope the Senate will join in and solve this issue before it becomes a crisis. That's how you build a better economy. That's how you improve jobs. That's how you help the students getting out of school find those jobs right here in Montana.
Mr. Cox?
Well, I think what we really need to take a look at, of course we want everybody to have, low interest rates and free this and free that. But the reality is every time the government gets involved in something, the price of those goods go up because they create a bubble. I mean, if you think about it, think of the advancement in the cost of tuition since government's been involved. It's just gone through the roof. And so now what we have is we have our younger generations all being strapped with these enormous loans. They can't even get a credit card loan, but they can get a $50,000 loan for school. What we need to do is we need to get the government out of the things they're not supposed to be in. I've read Article 1, Section 8. I'm not sure in there where they have the ability at the federal level to subsidize education. It's a state issue. Any power not left to the United States nor prohibited to the states is left to the states or to the people. That's the 10th Amendment. What the federal government is authorized to do is very limited. It's right there, Article 1, Section 8. So, do I care about education? Absolutely. We need an education. We need free market to bring the prices of education down. The more money government pumps in, the bigger the bureaucracy gets. And in fact, I think we could save $200 billion out of our deficit if we got rid of the Department of Education out of the federal level and put it back to the states where it belongs.
Well, thank you, Jim. It's not been very many years ago that my kids were in college, and I will tell you that the kind of debt that they rung up was incredible. And without Pell Grants, it would have been even worse. And the interest rates were plenty high back then, and I don't consider myself poor. I consider myself middle class. And it was very, very hard. Unlike my parents when I went to college who could pay the way for me to go to school, that's certainly not what it was like in my generation with my kids. So things like lower interest loans and Pell Grants are critically important. The Congressman talks about a bill that was passed over in the House to keep it at 3.4%, and I applaud that effort. Unfortunately, to pay for that, and we do need to pay for things in Washington, D.C., to pay for that, they took it away from healthcare prevention, mostly focused on women. That's a non-starter. That's robbing Peter to pay Paul. You can't do that. The proposal in the Senate, which, by the way, the House hasn't taken up, which is the problem with Washington, D.C., that the House hasn't taken up, cuts loopholes for large corporations. That's something that the Congressman has protected, as well as taxpayers for millionaires. So we have to know where the priorities are. And this isn't about subsidizing college. This is about subsidizing our next generation of entrepreneurs and businessmen, scientists and engineers that will run this economy through the 21st century and beyond. It's critically important that we come together as Democrats and Republicans, as House members and Senate members, and get something passed sooner rather than later. It should have been done 6 weeks ago when kids were just getting done with school. But get something passed that really helps the next generation be all they can be. So that when the Congressman has them raise their hand and say that things are going to be better for your kids, they will raise their hands. This is one of the reasons they're not.
Very good. Jan, the last one.
Mr. Cox, there are plenty of accusations out in the public that Washington, D.C. is broken. And neither major party deserves respect because they refuse to work collaboratively for a compromise. I hope that when the two other candidates answer this question, they can give us at least a couple of examples of bills that they have sponsored with someone from the opposing party and tell us how they have fared with those bills. But for you, I would like to hear that it's easy to criticize from the outside. I'd like to hear what you would do, some constructive suggestions about how you would move things forward in Washington, D.C.
Well, I guess the first part of the question was compromise. Well, the way compromise works, you basically have two sides. They go into the middle. Neither person ends up getting what they want. What I see with the compromise in Washington, it's really two sides of the same coin. You know, we keep talking about they're going to get something done. Well, right now, I think we're on schedule to have a $3.8 trillion deficit this year, and we're only going to bring in $2.2 trillion. So what would I do that's productive? I would cut. I would do everything I could to convince my colleagues when I was up there that they need to get in line with the Constitution. I mean, you want to talk about national defense. Do you think that if a country goes bankrupt, that a freedom-type government comes up in its place? I mean, the most important thing we really have facing us right now is the economy. If we don't get our deficit under control, if we don't quit printing money, we are going to be bankrupt. Okay, so yeah, so some people are going to have to go without services. What's going to happen when we're bankrupt? We're in the best country that's ever existed, and it's slipping away. There's never been a time in the history of the world that a governmental collapse brought freedom and prosperity to the people who live there. So, am I going to compromise? What would I do that would be constructive? I'm sure that in the eyes of the people who are up there, there's nothing I'm going to do that's constructive because they're in the back pockets of all the people who are stealing from you. They're the beneficiaries of this plunder. They take from you, they give to themselves. Did you get anything out of the $16.1 trillion that was printed? I don't think so.
Thank you, sir. Senator?
Yeah, I do hope we get to the question about the national debt and deficit at some point in time. And I think it's an important issue, and I appreciate Dan's thoughts. I can tell you that when my grandparents came to north central Montana 100 years ago from the Red River Valley, they didn't do anything alone. They did it by working together. They built their farm by working together, the barn in particular. They built their community by working together. Everybody pitching in. Everybody sacrificing a little bit for their neighbors to build a community. From a Washington DC perspective, I can tell you the one that comes to mind most quickly is an issue that I worked with Bob Corker, Republican out of Tennessee. Bob was elected the same year I was, and it had to do with debit interchange. It had to do with saving our community banks and credit unions in the rural states. Locally, at a more local level, there was a group of Democrats and Republicans, conservationists, loggers, recreationists who got together and put aside their differences and worked on a bill to how to better manage our Forest Service land. It was called Forest Jobs and Recreation. Some of the people were even on Congressman Rehberg's former financial staff when he ran the first time. These people are people who work in the woods. They're people who care about our clean air and clean water. They're folks that care about our forests. They know they need to be managed in a different way because, quite frankly, right now everybody's losing and they do it. And they put forth a proposal that Democrats, Republicans, every ilk put their 2 bits in on. And it's been kind of a politics, mainly because the congressman is more concerned about his job than he is about the people in western Montana. Congressman.
Thank you. I'm ready, willing, and able to roll up my sleeves, sit around the table, and work with anyone who will work with me. And I think I have a history of doing that. Montana hasn't had a voice in the Senate other than one voice because both our senators vote the same. I honestly believe that I'll make Max Baucus a better senator, and he'll make me a better senator, because we'll be able to sit around the table and come up with the kind of compromises necessary to look out for Montana first, putting people back to work, building a better economy. Who have I worked with in the past? Well, Rosa DeLauro, one of the most liberal Democrats. She's now my ranking member of my appropriations subcommittee. What did we do? We teamed up to oppose the Bush administration to get country of origin labeling passed through the United States House of Representatives. It would not have happened if she and I had not teamed it together. Rosa and I like working with each other so well that we created the Baby Caucus. We are the co-founders and the co-chairman of the Baby Caucus in Congress. What does it do? We care about 0 to 3 years old. We look for special areas where we can help them to the best of our ability. It's really a fascinating endeavor. We talk about 0 to 3 nutrition, 0 to 3 drug abuse of their parents, 0 to 3 exercise and psychological damage that can be done, the lifestyle and the livability of our most fragile, our 0 to 3-year-olds. I work with David Bourne on Second Amendment rights, a Democrat from Oklahoma, who happens to be retiring. So there are a lot of those kinds of issues that I'm interested in, but I work with Democrats, and as I suggested, I'm not interested in the interests of necessarily my party. I'm mostly interested in the interests of the state of Montana, not Republicans, not Democrats, but what's going to put people back to work, what's going to create a better economy, and I think I can work with Senator Baucus in the Senate to bring that kind of common sense to that body.
Very good. Next question by Nick.
Congressman Rehberg, you've been a strong opponent to health care legislation enacted by the current Congress. Specifically, as a U.S. Senator, what would you offer as an alternative?
Well, let's begin with the health care mandate, which is what is creating the problem in the first place, and the unintended consequences of 2 new entitlements. People aren't even talking about the entitlements that exist within the health care bill. It's not working. And what are they? It's the expansion of Medicaid and the insurance premium subsidy. It adds up to $1.4 trillion over the course of the next 10 years. Let's talk about the job killer that the health care reform did, but it didn't reform health care. Let's talk about the economy and the effect it is having on the economy, or the way it's being paid for, which is taking $500 billion away from senior citizens and their Medicare, and taking $500 billion in new taxes, fees, and penalties. That's the problem with the existing health care reform. What were our ideas that we wanted to push forward? Well, you don't even begin to control the cost of health care unless you address defensive medicine. And why was tort reform not included? It was a payoff to the trial lawyers. It was nothing more than an opportunity to pay them back for their election efforts in the 2008 presidential year. So defensive medicine is the first thing. If you don't believe me, talk to your own doctor, your hospital administrator, the hospital board members, and they'll tell you defensive medicine occurs in every clinic throughout America, every hospital, every doctor's office. It's not the lawsuit, it's the fear of lawsuit. We would work on pooling association health care plans, where a church has an opportunity to team up with Montana churches, with Wyoming churches, and Idaho churches and Washington churches to build a bigger pool to go out and have their business competed for. Telemedicine is another area that I would work on. I would work on trying to get doctors into family practice, and I helped create the family practice residency program in Montana when I was lieutenant governor. We didn't have one. We needed more family practice doctors, and we do as a result of my actions when I was lieutenant governor working with our director of SRS, Julia Robinson. So I think I know how to create a better environment to truly reform healthcare, to control the cost, to give people an opportunity to have the kind of coverage they need, they deserve, they want, without destroying their economy, without costing the jobs.
Senator?
Oh, very good. Yes, I thought you were going the other way. That's good. Well, let me start a few years back. When Charlotte and I first moved to the farm and I just finished teaching school, I just retired out of that business after 2 years. And we had our second child, and quite frankly, the books on the farm weren't balancing as good as we had hoped, and so we gave up health insurance for a couple of years. I remember walking across the yard, getting a pain in my back, wondering what's going on there, you know, but I can't go to the doc because I don't have health insurance. The issue is our old healthcare system was broken and broken badly. We needed something to hold insurance companies accountable. And that's what happened. So what happened after healthcare was passed? And by the way, if the mandate's thrown out, the Supreme Court may well do that, or they may not a week from now or 2 weeks from now. The whole healthcare goes because it's a fundamental part of it, personal responsibility. But what happens is folks that have pre-existing conditions who don't fall to their own now can get insurance. People who happen to get sick and now are being thrown off of policies now can't get thrown off of policies. Holds insurance companies accountable. Uninsured folks, on 45 million, will have access to insurance. 10 to 20% of the healthcare costs, about $2,000 a year for folks who have insurance in this state, is paid for the uninsured. As far as the $500 billion that the congressman talks about, that's not taken away from Medicare folks, it's taken away from insurance providers and holding them accountable and getting rid of the fraud and abuse that's in healthcare. Interestingly enough, there was a survey that was done, or a study that was done just lately. Healthcare costs are rising at the lowest level now, it's less than 1%. Where in the past few years it's been 4 or 5, double digits. I think we're starting to see the impacts of it, but I can tell you this, the old healthcare system didn't work. It drove people into poverty, and they not only lost one generation of health, but several. They were unlucky and got sick.
Mr. Cox?
So, can you restate the question? I got kind of lost with the two candidates. I don't know if they're on topic. Is it, why hasn't Denny Rehberg supported?
Sure. The question was, question and comments to Rehberg was, you've been a strong opponent of health care legislation enacted by the current Congress. What would you, specifically, what would you offer as an alternative?
Actually, it wasn't the current Congress, by the way. It was the last Congress.
Well,
We're in the restraining order.
here's probably where Denny and I would agree. I think that we do need to get rid of it. I do, however, think that, you know, there's been several times when Denny's voted for similar things, like the great big huge prescription B plan and other things. I guess the real question here is, once again, you know, what aren't we going to let the government take over? It seems like, you know, really the health industry is a business just like anything else. And when the government owns business, it's called communism. And when the government controls capital, it's called fascism. And I would really like to go back to a free market enterprise system and keep these government agencies from blowing up everything when they dump their money. The other question is, how are we going to pay for it? Once again, how are we going to pay for any of this stuff?
Gentlemen, I'd like to kick in, quite frankly. We're talking about health care costs for Montanans. I'm not talking about federal policy to a certain extent. If we get rid of the federal health care reform law, are we going back to the days where, indeed, under the Bush administration, and with the GOP in control of both houses, that health costs were spiraling out of control? I'll let Mr. Rehberg.
I might point out that it is already spiraling out of control. If you listen to Senator Marcus on the floor when he introduced the legislation that he hadn't read, because the staff was going to read it for him, He said it would cost anywhere between 1 trillion and 2.5 trillion. That should have woken the media up. You should have asked the question, what are you thinking? What do you mean you don't know the difference between 1 trillion and 2.5 trillion? And so it was passed with the belief it was going to come in at 1 trillion, and guess what? It's already doubled in cost. They are not controlling the cost. All they're doing is adding people to a failed system. Medicare Part B was prescription drug coverage for seniors. There was a move at the time to want to make it a government-run system, and we resisted that. We put it out on the free market. There are competition going on between packages, and you know what? For the first time in a long time, can the government say a program came in at less cost than they anticipated? And that's exactly what happened with Medicare Part B, prescription drug coverage for seniors. I did address the cost. Preventive health. That is one of the largest drivers that's out there. But again, it was a payoff to the trial lawyers who wanted to be left out. They didn't want tort reform. And so as a result, we have this massive healthcare reform that left trial lawyers free in defensive medicine untouched. So there are ways of controlling the cost of healthcare. And we can work on that, and we're willing to work on it, but not with a mandate that further encroaches on what Dan's talking about, our freedoms and our liberties. And that's what this court is going to be deciding, and it may unravel the whole package to begin with and to end.
Thank you. Senator?
And if it does, we'll go back to the old system. You'll see healthcare costs piling out of control, just like you did. And you were right. Your premise in your question was absolutely correct. Look, my wife and I are small business people. We still farm. We are a group of two. That's not particularly attractive in the old system. Once the exchange is set up, we can be combined with other folks, and there's competition in the private sector, just like Part B in the prescription drug plan. This isn't government health care. This is about allowing for the private sector to work to help drive down costs. It's about working families. It's about small businesses being able to get health care without breaking the bank. Right now, they've got to make a choice. And if they make the wrong choice, and decide, you know what, we're going to pay for food or heat, or maybe we're going to buy a new used car instead of health care, and they happen to get sick, man, they're in trouble. And there's plenty of examples of that kind of trouble that happens every day to good, hardworking Montanans.
He's actually...
So, no, please, you're taking my time. So, the fact of the matter is we need to change it. We need to change the system. This was a step in that direction to let the private sector be more competitive to help provide health care for folks around the country. As far as tort reform goes, I think it's absolutely ironic, knowing the congressman's history, that he's the one that's talking about free
Congressman, would you like to respond?
Certainly I will. You know, you would think a senator would want to talk about the key issues. And the issue is the cost of health insurance going up? And it is. This didn't save anything. It just added more people to the failing system. You will have 20 to 30 million people lose their health care coverage under their employer based upon this program. And it is also ironic that the doc fix was left out. The doctors are not able to now choose their patients. Patients are having the opportunity to choose the doctor. The doctor's having a difficult time because they decided to separate that cost because they wanted to keep the cost under $1 trillion. They were fooling the American public. They didn't fix that, and they haven't fixed it. The doctors are struggling because they're not having their costs covered right now. I was a pool of one as well in the ranching business, Jan and I. We were in the same situation, trying to raise our family. This does not solve the problem. All it does is create a government-run system. You know, the irony is small businesses, in many cases, will pay as much as $6,000 to $7,000 to $8,000 for their employee, and the penalty that they put in place for dropping that coverage is $2,000. Talk about putting a disincentive into place. What kind of business sense is that? Because you know what the government's going to figure out then? That $2,000 doesn't cover the cost of the penalty. So then they're going to raise it to 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7. And then we're going to find ourselves in the same situation where small businesses are struggling to keep their doors open because they're having to pay the cost of a government-run system. And that's what we're being forced into. This is not cost savings. This is not cost containment. All this does is one step towards universal government-run healthcare system.
Thank you, sir. Taylor is going to ask him this question. Scott, you asked him again? Go ahead.
Yeah, this is kind of a strange debate, to tell you the truth. And this is what I do see a lot in government, is you have one side talking about we need to get rid of it, and the other side saying we need to keep it. I'm really kind of confused on the issue. I don't know how Congressman Rehberg plans on voting, but I do notice that Mitt Romney is now standing in front of signs that say repeal and replace Obamacare. I'm pretty sure that most people who want to repeal Obamacare, as he states it, don't want to replace with Romney Care. So I don't know how he plans on voting when that kind of stuff is potentially going to be pushed by Romney, who's already has that track record in Massachusetts. So, I mean, is this really us just divided over two parties that are going to, I guess, compromise and go with the exact same thing anyways in the end? I don't know if you guys even have a choice, to tell you the truth.
Very good. We're going to move on. Taylor?
That's Mr. Cox on this one. Give it to you. Montana added 1,300 jobs in May, but the workforce increased and the unemployment rate went up. Which industries need to recover to get Montana's unemployment rate where it was before the recession, and what can you offer to get us there from Washington?
Well, I grew up in an industrial community. There was a lot of entrepreneurs that started businesses. I'm one of those. I have my own fishing lure manufacturing company. I've had it since 2000. What can government do to help industry? They can get out of the way. When I was in one of my previous businesses, which I've now sold, the CPSIA came down with a regulation that said you need to have lead testing at 90 parts per million on any product that you're now going to put in the hands of a 12-year-old. Well, that sounds great, except for we were selling tutus. Do you realize the reality of is there lead in tutus? It costs our company over $40,000 to test in order to comply with these regulations. This is the Consumer Product Safety, the acronyms go on forever. But that's the point. Can government create jobs? I don't really think so, because in order to create a job, they have to take money from you to give to him. What they can do is they can hinder industry. And I think that's what we've seen. So if you want to get the economy back, you got to be able to fit your government inside the Constitution.
Congressman?
Dan is absolutely correct. In fact, I led the effort when the Consumer Product Safety Commission took a piece of legislation where we didn't want lead in toys and started writing regulations. And I started getting phone calls from Kawasaki dealers, Polaris dealers, Honda, saying, you know what, the government's telling us we have to take our youth motorcycles, snowmobiles, and ATVs out of the showroom, including the repair parts. I said, why? And they said, because there's lead in the battery cables and valve stems. I said, are you honestly telling me the Consumer Product Safety Commission believes that children are going to chew on battery cables? I'm not sure that makes much common sense. We fought that issue for 3 years, and I was finally successful in December in passing legislation to repeal that portion of that law. It is regulations. It is taxation. Let's talk about Dodd-Frank for a minute, the financial reform. The banks are seized up. The very banks that we were trying to save, the too small, not the too large to fail, are seized up and they're bound up, and the auditors are coming in and they can't move one way or the other. I met with the home builders in Missoula yesterday. They said, please, would you just repeal that or find some relief, because we can't put our builders back to work in Missoula because of the Dodd-Frank legislation that passed. The regulations, we don't even know all the regulations that are being crafted. So it's our tax policy, it's our regulatory policy. If you want to put people back to work, get out of the way of projects like the Keystone. Build the infrastructure necessary to take advantage of the things that we have right here in Montana. We are, in fact, a plethora of energy solutions: oil, gas, coal, wind, solar, geothermal, and biomass. We're everything but offshore drilling and nuclear. We have that opportunity to build those jobs. We can build those jobs on those basic industries if government would just get out of the way. And that's the fundamental contrast of philosophy between me and the incumbent. I believe that small business is the solution. I want to liberate Main Street. He has a tendency to believe the government can buy prosperity through failed policies like the stimulus package. It didn't stimulate the economy.
Senator?
Let's make one thing clear. Questions about how we get the economy going in Montana. When we talk about energy, we got an incredible energy opportunity, both renewable and conventional. The congressman allowed the Navy, in fact, instructed the Navy to stop the research on biofuels. That helps agriculture, that helps research and development down the line. Got a wood products bill, it's going to put folks to work in the forest. Congressman, stop that. We've got universities in this state that develop great entrepreneurs and great engineers. I've got a bill that I just passed a month and a half ago, probably the best jobs bill we've passed in a while, that will help those companies get access to capital so that they can expand and go forth and hire people, those small businesses. And if you want to talk about Dodd-Frank, the congressman did oppose it. It held Wall Street accountable, but he opposed it for obvious reasons. And we have been working with the regulators to make sure that they treat our community banks fairly so they can get the money out the door. It has been an ongoing battle, but we can continue to do it with my position on the banking committee. And if you want to talk about the home builders really need, they need a strong Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac for that 30-year note so you guys can buy houses. A 30-year note is critical. It's as critical as the mortgage interest deduction. And if it's not there, if we don't replace Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac with something or rebuild it with something, that 30-year note's gone and your housing industry is gone. So it's critically important you send somebody to Washington, D.C. that understands what's going on in Washington and knows how to move the economy forward, not put up roadblocks.
Folks, once again, applause after the debate. Thank you. Congressman?
Yeah, it is necessary to listen to businesses. That's why I'm endorsed by the Contractor Association. That's why I am a realtor and a home builder. And that's why we build business for the purposes of understanding the financial markets. You know, they will tell you that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac was the problem. What created the housing bubble in the first place? Don't blame the builders, the realtors, the banks, and the consumer. They were sucked into something believing that the government told them they could get something for nothing, that they could buy a home for zero down and zero interest, that they could flip that home, and they could keep doing that, and they could make a living just flipping homes. And they built this bubble. And who got left out of the financial reform package? Dodd-Frank, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And they created the problem. They were the ones that were encouraging. They were the ones that were buying up the assets. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac is the problem. The large banks, they're laughing about Dodd-Frank. They have the ability to hire the lawyers. They have the ability to hire people from the auditing entities. They know how to work within the system. The people that are struggling right now are the Montana community bankers. And to a bank, when you talk to them about the regulations that are being brought down on them by Dodd-Frank, they are in opposition. They're afraid. They can't move. They get whipsawed because the one group of auditors come in and say you're not giving enough low-interest low-income loans. The next group comes in and penalizes them for giving too many low-income loans. They're getting whipsawed back and forth. It was not the solution. It was a solution, but it was not the right solution, and it's affecting our housing market, and our housing market is affecting our ability to hire more people, and the ability to hire more people is affecting our economy in Montana.
Mr. Cox, please.
Well, once again, we have the situation where the government gets involved, they pump a bunch of printed money into it, and you have a bubble, and the bubble bursts. We really need to understand inflation. Every time they print money, your purchasing power of your dollar goes down. They're printing the money for these mortgages. So when there's a huge boom that's done by the government, they're printing the money, your money's inflated, your purchasing power goes down. So now let me ask you this. So when the prices of real estate go up really high and you purchase, what happens when it deflates? And then you can no longer afford to pay that. Well, let's listen to what Thomas Jefferson said. He said, if you ever allow private banks to control the issuance of your currency, first by inflation, then by deflation, they'll deprive you of all property and leave you homeless on the continent your fathers conquered. That's exactly what's going on in this situation. Of course they want another housing bubble, because when it pops or they deflate you, not only did they print all the money, but they got the houses essentially for free. We need to quit printing money. We need to pay our way, and we need to get the dollar back to where it's worth something again.
Thank you. Moving on, Jen will ask this question.
My question is for the Congressman. In February, you addressed the Montana legislature and spoke of standing up for states' rights. You said, quote, it's the idea that the people are the experts and that the best government is self-government. It's the idea that the states created the federal government and not the other way around, and that states like Montana remain the best laboratories of democracy in the entire world. You went on to say, quote, "My job as your congressman is to defend the states' rights principle in Washington." And you further wondered about putting a federal judge on the endangered species list because his gray wolf ruling disregarded states' rights. My question is, should the senator we elect stand up for states' rights when Montana defends its longstanding legislatively adopted rule on corporate campaign contributions against Citizens United? Or should should Supreme Court justices who oppose the state position go on the endangered species list?
I agree with the Citizens United decision because there should be nothing more free than political free speech. I have to come down on the side, and one of the reasons I voted against the original campaign finance of Feingold and McCain was because I believe that every single dime ought to be accounted for. It ought to be disclosed from $1 within 24 hours on the internet. That's why when I was presented a pledge to outlaw outside influence in Montana on third-party ads, I carried a step further and said, fine, I agree, and let's go even further than that, and let's outlaw all outside contributions from any organization, whether it's a political action committee, a union, or an individual. It was declined. Why? Probably because of the payoff from the swipe fee that he was talking about and all the Wall Street money that came in as a result of his decision to carry that legislation with Senator Corker. That was the payoff. He even admitted in the press that there was money probably that came in as a result of carrying that legislation. That's what's wrong with our political system. And the best way that you can get at our political system and understand the kind of money that is involved is to require every single dollar to be disclosed within a 24-hour period. But these are federal elections. The state has the ability to control their state contributions, but when it comes to federal government and money coming in and out of the state, Citizens United was the right decision on the part of the Supreme Court.
Senator?
News flash, corporations are people. Corporations are not people, and they shouldn't be people. Right now, because of the Citizens United case, corporations have more rights when it comes to campaign donations than people do. Not only do we not have to know where they come from, they can deduct them. It's crazy. The Citizens United case absolutely puts our democracy at risk. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. The amount of secret money that's coming into this campaign alone, whether it's from corporations onshore or offshore, which by the way is patently illegal, we don't know, because there's no transparency whatsoever, is just absolutely corrupts the whole process of the elections. And until it's changed, until we follow the rule that was passed back in 1960 by the people of the state of Montana, when the Anaconda Copper Company was running the show. And they said, enough is enough, we're not going to allow corporations to run our government anymore. Until we follow that lead, it puts our democracy at risk. And I know the TV stations like it a lot because there's a lot of money being spent here. But the bottom line is, really the bottom line is, if we're going to put these elections back in the hands of people, and that's who votes, Citizens United needs to be totally taken off. Now, as far as states' rights go,
Talk about the unions.
Sir, continue.
okay. As far as states' rights goes, I think that absolutely important to look at the states' rights. It's one of the reasons I carried and got the wolf delisting and turned back into state hands passed. And it was important to do. It was good for the wolves, and I think they are recovered, and it was time to manage it in a recovered way. That's a states' rights kind of issue. But so is the Citizens United decision because of the work that was done 100 years ago in this state.
Mr. Cox.
This is a pretty interesting argument. I guess the reason why most people would oppose having corporations get to campaigns is because of the obvious problem with corporate fascism, where they're basically lobbying the government to pass laws that put in really strict regulations. And being a business owner, I know what that really does. It pushes out the small business owner who can't afford to pay $40,000 in order to get his products tested for some crazy compliance. So, yeah, there's a ton of people who are abusing that. But the other side of it is let's say you are a small business owner. Are we saying that when they own their business, that their business doesn't have rights? They don't have the right to retain their property. They don't have the right to fight for the things they've earned. You know, this is more than just a free speech issue. This is just being able to protect your rights. The problem here isn't corporations being able to fund campaigns. It's their reason why they're doing it. What we need honest politicians who are going to look the lobbyists straight in the eye and say, you know what, if you're here for a right, I got your ear. If you're here for a corporate bailout, a specific regulation to get over your something over on your competitor, it's not going to happen. And I'll tell you right now, you know, if you are one of these corporate fascists, don't donate to my campaign, because you must be drunk, because I'm not going to help you whatsoever.
Moving on, Nick.
Senator Tester, the actions of Congress of late seem somewhat contradictory. For instance, we want the post office to look for cost savings efficiencies, but we don't want them to close rural post offices, at least in Montana. As U.S. Senator, how do you balance what is right for Montana and what is right for the country?
Well, I think you get more pairs of eyes looking at this than just the Postmaster General. I think what we've seen come out of the Postmaster General is a real problem. The guy's from Pittsburgh, and I know Pittsburgh's a really nice place, but I don't think he understands the challenges in rural America. For him to come down with a recommendation that says we're just going to carte blanche shut this post office down, we're just going to go to 5-day delivery, that's it, no discussion, it's over with, is not the way to go. And I know they'll say, well, we went out to the local communities and we got public input, but they didn't listen to that public input. So what I've tried to do, and if we could get the House to take it up, it would work, is we've had the Postal Regulatory Commission have another set of eyes on this. So if the Postmaster General says they're going to close a post office down in Big Sky, the Postal Regulatory Commission takes a look and determines if it's the right thing to do. It just doesn't happen automatically. Look, the post office has some opportunity to save some money. And we've given them some very good recommendations, some of which they've nodded their head to, some of which they've squealed and ran away. For example, in a lot of these small communities, the post office can be combined with another store that might be in town. The post office might be able to do other duties, sell fishing license, hunting license, no republic, those kind of things. From an upper end thing, I mean, we're talking about cutting a lot of the low-hanging employees. We ought to have caps on their salary. The Postmaster General before this one made 4 times what the President did. I put and it's in the bill, to complement what a cabinet official makes, which is the right way to go. So there's things that they can do, and there's things they can save money, but you've got to use common sense and some Montana perspective, a rural perspective, to move forward with the postal bill that's going to work for this country. It's still important in a lot of areas that don't have broadband. It's still important for a lot of other folks who depend on it for the prescription drugs.
Congressman.
It's with some humor, perhaps I say I support the Senate bill because it doesn't do anything. But it doesn't do anything. All it is a delay. We need that delay. That's exactly what we need because we haven't got all the answers. I'm the only member of the delegation that had one of my staff attend every single meeting in Montana about the closure. Let me talk about the post office real quickly, how a conservative Republican can talk about the subsidization of something like the post office. Our government set it up. They made people dependent on it. And as a conservative, you can't just pull the rug out from under it. What's settled Montana? Our rail. Why? Because we're a large expanse with a little population. Why do we get help in the highway bill? Same issue. Essential air service, Amtrak. You can go on down the list of rural electrification and credit unions and rural telephone. We have a large geography with a very little population. We needed the government's assistance at the beginning of our time and trying to keep up with fiber and such. And so I'm always able to balance what's in the best interest of the people of Montana with my conservative fiscal policy because I clearly understand that it isn't necessarily about a Republican solution or a Democrat solution. As a representative of Montana, it has to be a Montana solution. And so the post office issue isn't ripe yet. We're not there. We don't know. You're not going to put the email genie back in that bottle, but you also can't make the people who live in the rural areas with large expanses between their mailbox dependent upon 1 or 2 day service or having to go 75 miles to get their mail. It will hurt commerce. It will hurt jobs in Montana. And I can justify the delay until we find the right answer. We're working on it to the best of our ability, but I don't support the various proposals that are being put forward to close the distribution centers and the post offices at this time, so I support the Senate bill.
Mr. Cox.
Well, I'm no expert on the postal service, I'll just admit it, but I have done a ton of shipping with the postal service, and in talking with them, it's my understanding that they have kind of a no-compete kind of a situation where they do have these contracts with, say, UPS and FedEx, but they're not allowed to compete with them. They're not allowed to have the same or a lower price. I know that I could ship, say, a small package for like $1.64 at the post office. If I ship the exact same thing with UPS, it's going to cost me like $7. So I guess that's one thing that we should probably look at, is opening it up so that these other shippers can compete. The other thing is, I don't know if this is true, but I understand that the post office had a bunch of funds diverted away from it. And so I'm not sure if this is a fiscal problem or what it is, but I think we should always look at shrinking government and making it more effective anywhere we can. So if there are areas that we can cut back, I think we should, but I do believe that Congressman Rehberg's right. I think that it is going to be tough for people in rural communities, which I've lived in, to get their mail if these post offices are cut out. So I think the first thing we ought to do is we ought to look at getting, some more free market solutions and see if we can possibly shrink the size of the Postal Service. If we have a competitor, we may not need it. We may have UPS or somebody have same service at the same price.
Very good, thank you. Tim.
Congressman, Montana has the resources to become a national leader in wind energy production, also in coal, oil, and gas. If we're already subsidizing oil to help create jobs, when, if ever, and how would we harness our other resources, including wind?
We have used our tax code to create incentives for wind. People have taken full advantage of it up in the northern region, central Montana and south central. And so we put a lot of money into those kinds of things. I first went to work for Congressman Ron Marlin in 1979, 80, 81, and 82. And the hot thing back there was wind and solar. And we've had tax credits in and out of our tax code for many years in an attempt to try and encourage that. But what we need in this country is a comprehensive energy policy. I thank the President for stealing our word and all the above solution, because we've been working on that very same thing, all of the above. It needs to be traditional fossil fuels, oil, gas, and coal, while at the same time trying to encourage our alternatives, the wind and the solar and the geothermal and such, while at the same time conserving energy, using what we're using now more efficiently. We don't have to ration. We just have to get smarter about it. And there are all kinds of exciting things that are going on, and tax credits to create that opportunity. And then we need to find a source of revenue. We've been looking at offshore drilling royalties, which hasn't been accounted yet, and put it into grants and loans to embed our way into the next generation of energy production. So a lot is being done. I'm actually on the committee and one of the leaders in the Energy and Water Appropriations Committee for the very purposes of trying to identify some of the areas that have the most promise. We don't want to pick winners and losers. That's kind of what the administration has been doing when they say they want to put coal out of business. We believe them. We think they're wrong in that policy. Because if they put coal out of business, this administration is affecting Montana jobs and Montana's economy. We need that all-of-the-above solution. We need the comprehensive energy policy. We're the ones to do it. We need a new president that is standing in the way of the all-of-the-above solution.
Senator.
Yeah, it goes without saying, our conventional resources in this country from energy, in the state is undeniable, whether it's oil, coal, or natural gas. And we've seen under Governor Schweitzer's leadership, more coal mined, more oil wells drilled, more gas wells drilled in this state. And I think that's a good thing for our energy independence. But make no mistake about it, we also could do the Saudi Arabia of renewable energy. Not only wind, we have better solar resources in Germany, better geothermal resources than Iceland. We can raise oil seeds like crazy on the farms and convert that into fuel. Like I said, the Navy had done some good research. Unfortunately, that research will come to an end if the House has their way and stops the biofuels research. But ultimately, if we're really going to move forward in a way where we receive energy independence, we need to promote more conservation. We need to invest more in research and development because there's also a lot of stuff out there like fusion and gosh knows things that haven't even come into our minds yet. Young people have to help us make more energy that will make energy more affordable in the future. So we have the ability to do it. More oil is being drilled right now in this country, less is being imported than in decades. And I think we need to put a full court press on renewables too, because I think there's an incredible opportunity there to move that ball forward.
Well, I guess there's the dreaded subsidy word. What that means for you is no doubt taxes going up, debt going up. I mean, we've been hearing, well, I've been hearing for most of my lifetime that if we just pump enough money into research or into this company or into giving a check, that eventually the economy is going to get big enough that it's going to pay off this massive debt. I'm totally against the government subsidizing any business. I think that we should certainly be opening up the ability for these businesses as long as they're responsible. I mean, there obviously should, life, liberty, or property. If you're going to have a corporation who's going to drill for oil and then he's going to damage life, liberty, or property, then there needs to be harsh consequences. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be doing everything in our power to, allow the ability for them to harvest those different resources. So should we look at everything? Of course we should. Should we subsidize everything? Not at all, because I don't want to pay for it. It hasn't worked yet. It's not going to work tomorrow, and it's not going to work 10 years from now.
Very good, thank you. At this point, I'd like to read several questions submitted by the audience, and I'd love to read all of them, and perhaps I will send these on to each of you as the campaign continues. Number one, for all, and for Mr. Cox as well, how can you justify Congress doing next to nothing this year on the deficit and the economy while we're fighting an election war? Basically, just the question is, what do you specifically propose to do to get past gridlock, reach across the side of the aisle, and if it is a dirty word, compromise for the benefit of Montana and this country?
Me first? Okay, not a problem. Well, I think what you do is you communicate, you're honest with people, you're straightforward, and hopefully they're not impeded by pledges they've signed or impeded by promises they've made to someone else that really doesn't stick with Montana values. Look, I was the only person to carry a jobs bill that got passed last year, passed both houses and signed by the president, the Vow to Hire Heroes Act for returning veterans. We passed a very, very good transportation bill that is paid for, that will help not build, but maintain and upkeep a lot of the roads, bridges, and highways in this state. We can't get the House to take it up. There's plenty of stuff that we can do. It's to get rid of the hyper-partisanship that's in Washington, D.C. right now. We have to build bridges with people and build trust off campus and those kind of things. And one of the things that deters, I think, both of us in this is that we come home every weekend. And that doesn't allow us a lot of time to stay back there and be off campus and visit with folks. It's kind of important from the old days. But that being said, you treat people with honesty and respect, and hopefully they'll do the same to you, and have it so your words are bond, and a handshake's a deal, and a deal's a deal, and you move forward, and you compromise. And right now, it's not good. It's not good between Democrats and Republicans. It's not good between the House and Senate.
Congressman.
You go out and you talk to small business, and they will tell you, we don't have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem. The compromise you're probably talking about is raising taxes and cutting spending. If you raise taxes during the recession, all you're doing is you're hurting the very people you're trying to help in the first place. That's the kind of economics that does not work. What you do is you try and remove the barriers, their ability to keep a little money in their pocket. If we'd had an opportunity to have a say on the stimulus, what we were trying to accomplish was maybe to suspend payroll taxes on employers and employees 100% for 1 year or half for 2 years in a row, or lower the corporate tax, or zero out the capital gains tax. There were a number of kind of tax code incentives we could create to try and expand our economy. But what did we do? They passed a bill that cost $1 trillion and added to the debt. In just that 1 year alone, in 2009, 2 bills were passed, appropriations, the stimulus was passed, and the President's health care reform was passed. That's $3 trillion in new spending. And you know what? The Appropriations Committee never got to meet once. Speaker Pelosi, Harry Reid, President of the United States, they didn't want input. They didn't want to have ideas. They didn't want to allow us the opportunity to go back and have town hall meetings and hear what the public said and bring them back and give us ideas on where we could make reductions. Do you realize that in one budget alone, and I had a hearing on this, improper payments, it's not waste, fraud, abuse, it's called improper payments. You know how much that adds up to 1 year? That's where somebody passes away and Social Security checks continue, or a payment is made on somebody that's dead under the stimulus. $125 billion in 1 year. We have a spending problem in this country. And why would you compromise on giving the credit card company more credit at a time when you can't afford what you've already got? They're misspending it the way it is. Give us an opportunity to work with a president that really, truly understands how to run a business, how to create incentives, how to put people back to work and truly grow our economy. You don't do it by raising taxes. You do it by trying to constrain government.
I think I was reaching for the word compromise as well there. I didn't hear too much from either side. Can we address that question again? Are you ready to step across the aisle and deal with pressing fiscal issues?
Absolutely. I mean, I think if you take a look, and Dan should get a pop at this, I hope he does. If you take a look at the Simpson-Bowles proposal, that was compromise. You take a look at Forest Jobs and Recreation, that's compromise. You take a look at the work we did on wolves, that was compromise. And that's how we came to some of them made it to law, some of them did. And I can tell you that when it comes to our deficit and our debt, there is not an accounting person out there that will tell you if we don't look at everything, if everything isn't looked at and addressed, we're not going to get the deficit debt under control. Not only expenditures, but tax reform too. They both have to be dealt with. And absolutely, compromise is a part of it. It's, as I said in one of my opening things, where I live, the place wouldn't have been built without folks working together and compromising.
Congressman?
I think I answered that in an earlier question as well, when I talked about the fact that I would sit down around the table, roll up my sleeves, and I'll work with anybody who will work with me. We don't win them all. I happen to chair one of the appropriations subcommittees, and I tried to make additional reductions that were not accepted by the Democratic-controlled Senate. My counterpart is Senator Harkin in Iowa. I didn't win them all. We went to a conference committee, and we in fact compromised. But let me ask you a compromise question. You probably don't want to give me $10,000, do you? I'm going to ask you to give me $10,000. You don't want to do it. Okay, then I'm going to suggest you only give me $5,000. That's a good compromise, isn't it? See, I don't want to take more money out of your pocket. I want to take zero out of your pocket. I don't want to start at 10 and get you to negotiate down to $5,000. What I'm suggesting is Simpson-Bowles is great, but I'm not going to fall for that anymore. We've fallen for those kind of promises before, where we give the tax increase and then we don't get the reductions to try and control the size of the government. We talk about a forest jobs bill and a recreation bill. The problem is the only thing that's guaranteed in that bill is wilderness, and it's not even in the title. Where's the compromise there? I came forward with a compromise, a reasonable compromise, and said, look, okay, if we have a phased-in opportunity where we have a certain level of stewardship that occurs in 1 year, and you create a certain number of jobs, you can have a certain number of acres, and it was unilaterally discounted. Where's the compromise in that? Those are the kinds of ideas I was getting from the people that I listened to as I traveled around Montana getting ideas. So there's a lot of compromise that goes on, and guess what? When I'm elected to the United States Senator, I'll make Senator Cox a better senator, and he'll make me one, because we'll have to compromise.
Thank you,
You're a
Congressman.
corporate puppet,
Sir?
Denny. Corporate puppet.
Excuse me? You can cast your ballot.
Thank you. Well, I would like to, I guess, compromise. How about we put out a bill that drops taxes, and the next time we put out a bill that drops spending? I mean, why are we always compromising to the point that it's still continuing to go up? I mean, with all due respect to my colleagues, I mean, I believe since Congressman Rehberg's been in office, the debt's gone up $10 trillion. And since Tester's been in there, the debt's gone up $6 trillion. And, you know, both of them have raised the debt ceiling more times than I can count. I think what we need to do is we need to start electing people who are going to support the people. I mean, if you really add up your taxes, do you realize that probably by the time, you know, depending on what state you live in, with sales tax, income tax, with my fishing lure company, do you realize there's a 10% federal excise tax that you're paying when you buy a fishing lure from me that I have to pay to the government that you never even see? I mean, over half of all of your money is going to them. So if you're going to raise your taxes, you're just enabling them to steal more from you. I want to be the guy who goes up there and says, you know what, enough's enough. Let's compromise down for once. Let's lower taxes and spending. Because if that money's in your pocket, it's going to be better for your family. I mean, how is it going to be better for the government to take money out of your pocket and then decide where to put it? I'm pretty sure you know the needs of your family. You know where best to put your money. Let's get it back. We didn't fight a revolutionary war because we didn't have too much, you know, it's like the king. We don't have enough taxes and we don't have enough spending. Revolution. It was the opposite of that. We need to have a little bit more liberty spirit and get back to the foundation of the country.
Very good. Thank you, sir. This question is posed to Congressman Rehberg. As a spouse of a U.S. military veteran, what have you done for the veterans of Montana in your term in Congress?
You know, one of the best decisions we made when we were in the majority is we created a subcommittee called Military Quality of Life. It's not that I don't want to be involved in the sexy issues of the aircraft carriers and the jets and the bullets and the vests and such, but our best weapon are our people, and our veterans are reflective of the best weapon. And so one of the first pieces of legislation I introduced was a pay raise for all our active military, our reserve, and our guard. But then I also asked to be assigned to the Military Quality of Life Appropriations, specifically for the purpose of trying to make life better for our veterans. How do we work with them to help them get the kinds of jobs that Senator Tesser was talking about? How do we work with them to see that their medical needs are taken care of? I've worked with Bethesda and Walter Reed and with the Fort Harrison in an attempt to try and help them get additional psychiatric help. I also worked with Senator Bonkus on the PTSD legislation. I don't talk a lot about it because I had a cousin who was lost in Vietnam, not in the war itself, but when he came back. He ultimately was hooked on drugs. He drank himself to death. His parents are dead now, and we talk about it a little bit more. I'm particularly sensitive to the whole PTSD idea, not just for the active military, those that are just coming back from the Guard, but for our veterans as well. So I worked with Senator Baucus on a piece of legislation to see that before they moved into their deployment, they had the opportunity to be counseled when they came back, and every 6 months for a 2-year period. So over the course of my time in the United States Congress, I've served on committees. I don't serve on the Veterans Affairs Committee. I was on the Military Quality of Life, which also dealt with all of the veterans funding, and I did everything I possibly could to see that they were helped in any possible way we possibly could. That's a lot of possibles.
Senator?
I do serve on the Veterans Affairs Committee in the Senate, and I can tell you the very first listening session that I went to here in Montana was in eastern Montana, and I had a Vietnam vet stand up in the back of the room and point at me and say, "You're not going to treat these vets like you treated us." And from that moment forward, I've done my level best to make sure this country lives up to the responsibilities that they make our veterans. It started with mileage reimbursement. When I first got there, it was 11 cents a mile. And we got it up to over 40 cents a mile. For veterans to be able, disabled veterans to be able to go get the health care that they deserve. Went on with working with the VA to get health clinics in rural America, all across rural America. Montana's been a big beneficiary of that because we have the second highest per capita of veterans in this country. It's right here. And a lot of them live in rural areas. I mean, really rural areas. It was making sure that we have a job for them when they come home. It's one of the reasons I carried the Bow to Hire Heroes Act last Congress. It's one of the reasons we got it passed and crossed at the finish line. And then the other thing that we did that was very important before I got there was all discretionary funding for the VA. They had to come with hat in hand every Congress and say, "Please, can we have some money?" And I said, "No, we're going to make this funding guaranteed, not only for 1 year, but for 2 years at a time, so that they can depend on it, they can plan on it, they can serve the veterans that they serve." We still got a lot more work to do. There's folks coming home with unseen injuries that need help. There's folks coming home with missing limbs that need help. And especially work that needs to be done in Montana and in the rural areas. It's why we need to get more healthcare folks, professionals out there. It's why we pushed the VA to build the medical facility, the mental health facility in Helena, and now they got to get the doggone thing staffed. And I think they're on the cusp of doing that. But the bottom line is, if we're going to send our folks off to war and make them suffer and make them sacrifice. By God, when they come back home, we're going to treat them right.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Cox.
Well, certainly veterans deserve the utmost respect. They should get everything that we promised them. I mean, that's what a contract is. We say, you go do this, this is what we're going to give you, we're going to take care of you. You uphold the contract. If you don't uphold your contract, what's going to happen to you? You know, let's say a credit card company. I mean, it is very important that we take care of our veterans. What I'm really most concerned about is that we quit making them. I mean, we really need to slow down on the wars. We don't even debate war anymore, really. I mean, when's the last time that Congress declared war? World War II. Leon Panetta went in front of the committee and he said, I get my marching orders to go to war from the international community, the United Nations. So, you know, the reason why you send somebody like me up there is because if we're going to go to war, it's got to be done with the most sober. I mean, you have to reflect, you have to look at all the evidence. We're not even debating it anymore. We just say, oh, Obama said this, Fox News said that, so we're going in. You know what? I couldn't really stand here today and say what I would do on a situation, but I do know this. I would demand that we talk about it, that we go through and we say, well, let's see the evidence of weapons of mass destruction. You know, what is going on here? So I think we need to put that power back in the hands of the Congress. If we're going to go to war, which I think is the last thing anybody should want to do, I think that, you know, none of us should be, you know, running to jump into war. But if we need to defend this country, then we defend it, and we come home, and we get back to commerce. You know, we don't need to be occupying the entire world.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Another question from the audience for Congressman Rehberg, but I'll extend it to all. What piece of major legislation which you were a primary sponsor during your years in the U.S. House are you most proud of?
You know, it would seem simple. I'll give you the big one first, and that was the pay raise for active military reserve requirement. That was the first piece of legislation I introduced, and it was a piece of legislation that was rolled into a larger piece of legislation. That's how we do business in the House, because there's 435 of us. We don't have the luxury of carrying all those separately. But the one that probably does the most for my number one priority, which is returning people to work and expanding our economy, is something as simple as the palladium coin. I know it sounds like a simple issue to a lot of people, and it may be discounted, but think about the Stillwater mine for a minute, and the two counties, whether it's Stillwater County or Sweetgrass County. It doesn't cost anything to mint this. This is all at the expense of the investors. The investors came to me. Those that want to invest in the coin themselves, they said, would you please give us the opportunity to invest in something that we find of value? And guess what? The only source in America is in Montana. There are jobs associated with it. There's an opportunity to use one of our natural resources. And it's what government really ought to do. It's the way to create a job and expand an economy where the government is a partner, not a senior partner, but a junior partner, allowing the opportunity for us to invest and grow, put people to work, and improve our economy. So it doesn't sound like the biggest issue, but it's just reflective of the kind of philosophy I believe that when you pass legislation, it better move you forward to what your priorities are. That is job creation for Montanans and improving and growing our economy.
Thank you, sir. Senator.
Well, I'd say probably about the Irishville Heroes Act that we passed Congress 6-8 months ago that would address the unemployment of our veterans as they come from Iraq and Afghanistan. Currently is about double. It's going to make some inroads. It's going to hold the military accountable to work with the VA. It's going to give businesses an opportunity to see the skill set these folks have when they come home. It's going to give some tax credits to small businesses who hire our veterans. Another one that I think is very important is delisting wolves. I think this is very, very much a hot button issue that was very, very polarized, and we were able to get people together and compromise and come up with a common sense solution to deal with wolves. Another one is access to capital. The bill was passed about 2 months ago. Access to capital for our small tech companies and small pharmaceutical companies is critically important if we're going to have job creation, even in a state like Montana. We've got a lot of great entrepreneurs out there who do a lot of really good work. But that work cannot come to fruition and translate into jobs unless they can get capital. we passed a bill that would make that happen. And I think those are the kind of things that I look at when I'm in Washington, D.C. I look at opportunities to put folks to work, to manage our wildlife in a reasonable way, and to protect the clean water and clean air. This is so important for not only our agriculture industry, but also our recreation industry here in this state.
Very good, sir. And Mr. Cox, if you go there, what would be your dream piece of legislation?
Can I change it back to legislation as I work? Okay. Well, we had a situation down in our county. The county commissioners were going to shove zoning down our throats, which was going to take away our property rights. And without getting into the 2-hour speech I used to give on it, there was a lot of really bad things in there. Like if your house burned down, it would only be able to come back to half the footprint. You know, they were telling you basically everything you could do with your property. That's what makes us Americans, really, is the one thing that distinguishes us from other countries is we have the authority over the use of our property. And so they were going to take away those rights. And so what I did is I put my name, I sat down, studied the Montana law, figured out how to repeal the growth policy, which would stop them from zoning us, put forward a Montana constitutional referendum, went through the signature gathering process with a team of people. They got put on the ballot, and it was accepted, and so the zoning was never able to be established. And it had just been voted in 2-1, but at that time it was being sold, and nobody knew what the zoning was going to look like. Once they read it, they were just, you know, ready to just tear it down, and so I led that charge. Then our Montana State Legislature, on the local government committee, they put forward about, I think it was 80-something bills that would then usurp what I'd just done. And so I spent quite a bit of time at home arguing against those bills. And so I haven't passed anything, but as a citizen, I have been in government. I've helped protect your property rights, maybe not you specifically because you weren't in that county, but that's the kind of thing I want to do on a federal basis. I want to protect your private property and your rights. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. We've come to the closing in which each of the candidates will conclude with a 2-minute statement. And I'd actually like to start with Mr. Fox again, unless we just got it.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think what we've really kind of seen here is we've just seen two sides of the same coin. You know, you have two sides that constantly bicker back and forth, but at the end of the day, the only thing you really end up with is an increase in government. When government increases, your freedoms recede. I was aware that I was going to be able to ask a question to one of the candidates. I'm just going to ask this rhetorically. A right is something that you don't need anyone else's authority to do. If it's a privilege, then you need permission. So if it needs to be permitted, licensed, or regulation stops it in some way, it's no longer a right. So I guess my rhetorical question to you is name one right that you currently have that isn't infringed upon by a permit, a license, or regulation. I mean, that's the society we live in today. You know, in communist countries, they have the ability to go to the mall. They have the ability to go to a theme park. That's not what makes us free. It's freedom of speech, your right to peaceably assemble, the right to bear arms, your right to property. These are the things I'm going to defend. And I stand here in opposition to anybody who votes differently. And I hope that this can be a different election. I hope that it's not just partisanship A versus partisanship B. You need to vote for your rights. If you don't vote for liberty, you're voting against yourself. And if you want somebody who's going to stand for you and the principles I've just laid out, I'm your guy, and I'm not going to compromise on them one bit. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Senator, your case for re-election, please.
Well, I want to thank the Montana Newspaper Association, and I want to thank the panel for a very well-run debate. Thank you very much for some great questions. And I want to thank being here too. Look, I'm very proud of my heritage. I said in my opening, I talked about my grandparents coming out and making a farm out of nothing, and my parents taking that ball and going with it. And in the late 70s, Charlotte and I took it over and have run it ever since. Agriculture is the #1 industry in this state, and I'm very, very proud to be a part of it. And I'm also very proud to be serving in the U.S. Senate. But I think as proud as I am to be a farmer, I think it's important to know that farming and agriculture is part of my blood. Building houses and mansion ranching is not ranching. And to say that you are when the congressman hasn't sold a cow or a goat in years and years and years is very, very unfortunate. Look, you send me back to Washington, D.C., I'm going to continue to represent your freedoms. I'm going to continue to make responsible decisions. I'm going to continue to make sure that the middle class isn't overtaxed, and we're taxed money right now. I'm going to continue to work to make sure that we have tax equity in this country because it is critically important. And I'm going to continue to work and make sure that Montana continues to be the best state and the best country in the world. God bless you.
Thank you. Congressman. Folks, please.
Thank you. People ask me why I am running for the United States Senate. I say you need a voice in the United States Senate. You don't have one now. You have a surrogate for a president that has failed economic policy. The deciding vote on a failed health care reform that didn't reform health care at all. You know, when I think about my own heritage and cracks like, well, I haven't ranched, well, I did. I sold out of my ranching operation to goats just last year. I was in business, ironically, with the Bacchus family up on the Stephen Ranch. It was the greatest partners I ever had. See, I have a herding operation, and I guess somebody doesn't understand the difference between farming and ranching. Because if you're ranching, you have livestock, and guess what? They eat every day. And you have to know the difference between keeping them in the fence or not, and branding and castrating. See, I didn't have the luxury of having anybody take over my ranch for me, because I was a sole proprietor. How do you build a more secure future for the people of Montana? Well, you don't get into petty partisan politics of a tax. What you do is you try and think of ways to put people to work. How do you build a more secure future? By eliminating the excessive regulations and the excessive taxation that is being dropped down on top of their head. And it's issues like the cap and trade, and it's issues like the failed stimulus, and it's issues of adding debt after debt after debt. When he became a senator, our debt was around $8 trillion. It's almost doubled in 6 short years. The people of America can't stand that. We need a congressman and a senator working together. If I'm in the Senate, I can work with the Congress to try and move Montana forward. I think that we're going to have the kind of president that can work with the bill as well. That clearly understands how to run a business, how to rebuild a business that was hurt by a federal entity called the death tax. How do you build a more secure future? You remove the impediments of a government. It's not a government solution, which seems to be the solution of today, is getting government out of the way, liberating Main Street, not empowering Wall Street, not carrying legislation for the benefit of the large banks in New York City and then benefiting through financial contributions. It's actually helping Main Street, building that more secure future. I can do it. I hope you will like me in November.
Thank you, sir. I want to thank all of you for coming. I want to thank the candidates, certainly, Montana Newspaper Association, and Buck Steve Floor. Thank you very much, folks.